Thanks. Hello, my name is Martin Reisacher from the University Library in Basel. And thanks a lot for having the possibility to share our concept of dynamic IIIF manifests. And I hope I can convince you a little bit of the chances for presentation and interoperability, even if it might scratch a little bit the borders of IIIF specifications. So what was the starting point? The starting point was a newspaper clipping collection covering the Swiss social and economic discourse from the 19th century to digital born items, digital born, around a million digital available articles from the Schweizerischen Wirtschaftsarchiv. It had great metadata. It is organized by thesaurus and even authority data. We also had the digital objects, JPEG 2000 files, OCR full text, and just across the road is the Digital Humanities Lab. They've presented CIPI, a IIIF image server, in a lightning talk, so we knew where to go when we had questions regarding IIIF images. For the backend, we had a lot of search server knowledge and infrastructure because the former Swiss National Library Catalog SwissBib was developed in-house. For the front end, we had an idea or a flexible prototype to adapt to different collections or solutions. And we had a great partner, a web agency in Berlin, Outer Media. But especially at the beginning, we had really little resources. There were no resources for the presentation, so we were trying to reuse as many components as possible. So the big challenge was we had no solution to present our digital objects. The main reason for that is that our digital objects are on Swiss national platforms, eRara and eManuscripta. So we don't have to provide this infrastructure. That's a national service, and that's great because they also offer IIIF APIs. I'll come to that later. But here that wasn't a possibility because it's a newspaper clipping collection. There are copyright issues. So we looked at the IIIF APIs and they offer presentation, full text, and authentication. So we thought that's nearly a complete match. A further challenge was that the articles are stored in boxes, and one box is a topic. So for example, a person or enterprise. You can see an analog example there. And we wanted to transform how people use those boxes, they flipped through the articles, to a digital form. And that was where we started thinking how we could do that. And at the end, we made the decision, let's even break the borders of the boxes. Let's the user decide how he wants to build his boxes, his collections, his sets. And that's when we said that dynamic IIIF APIs would be the key to power our digital presentation. But we didn't really think a lot about concepts at that point. It was more like, if it works, it works. So let's have a look at the IIIF specifications and implementation. So there's the IIIF manifest, most of you might be familiar with, and it's for a single compound object. Normally you find it on the detail page, so it's quite static. Then you have the IIIF collection, which allows to group manifests, and it can be used for showing dynamic results from a search. So you might say that's exactly what you need, but there were some downsides at the implementation level. Collections are not really well supported by IIIF viewers, which might also be because they are often very big, even if they have sub-collections. And even the paging functionality disappeared in Presentation API 3.0. But the most important downside was that it doesn't support IIIF search API. You remember full text, it's only within a full manifest and not a collection. So we were not completely sure whether those are fewer implementation or maybe some IIIF conceptual implications, but we decided to go forward. So I want to show you the possibilities for presentations, and yeah, it's the power of IIIF viewers. They are for free, they offer awesome functionalities. You get further developments through plugins, or we even changed from Universal Viewer to Mirador 3 without any problems. You benefit from the experience of big libraries and also from small initiatives. We put a lot of thought into user experience and all that stuff. And you might not know they are also fully customizable. You can pass configuration files, so you can also have different kind of views within your portal. And it's a look and feel user know and appreciate. And I think that's also really important if there are some more complex functionalities. So let me show you what that means for our implementation. Here you can see the portal. It's pretty straightforward. A list view, you have a few search filters. Let's use our thesaurus, for example. Let's say we look for nuclear energy. And you have detail pages, you know, so I'll just go now to the kind of gallery, IIIF view. As you can see, all the images are now loaded within Mirador. And you can go to the next page. You can even take a bigger subset. And you see it's all working quite fast. But it wouldn't be Mirador if there wouldn't be a lot more functionalities. You have now a gallery view, but you also have the metadata for each article, where you can even add an internal structure. For example, here it's the date for navigation. But let's now dive deeper into the concept of dynamic manifests. Let's do a search. Let's search for vaccination. In German, that's Impfung. Let's hope by the next year we'll all be vaccinated and can meet in real life. So here we have now 2000 hits. Let's see what's within this subset. We can also use the filters. For example, let's look when this was a topic within the newspapers. You can see 2013. There are more hits, especially in August. Okay, but that's now a little bit small to read. So let's change the view. Let's switch to a scroll view where we can just flip through the headers. Sorry, it's all in German, but it's about Impfzwang as an obligation for vaccination. Okay, it's an Epidemiegesetz, a law about epidemics. Yes, in 2013, there was a referendum in Switzerland about an epidemic law, which included the discussion about the obligation for vaccination. So that was pretty much the reason. That's also now the base of actions for the coronavirus legislation. But what we saw so far is only the presentation API. What we were talking about is also full text API. So let's have a look at that. Let's search, for example, for the obligation for vaccination, Impfzwang. Let's switch back to Mirador view. Let's say we want to know when this topic came up in the discussion, at least within our collection. You can see it's 2013 that there are more hits. There's only one article before 2013. Okay, but let's have a look at the full text search. You also have IIIF, so you have full text highlighting. So now you can go really quickly through the collection, just focusing on the keywords you are interested in. And the great thing is, I told you before that you can reuse plugins. So there was also a lightning talk, and it's really a shame that the session from the BSP is at the same time, because I really wanted to participate. They offered a plugin for full text overlay. That's really great. That's something we didn't even think about at the beginning, that there would be the possibility to have this. But yes, it was pretty straightforward. We only had to install the plugin, and now we have also IIIF full text overlay. So that was pretty much what I wanted to show for the presentation side. I think it's good to mention again that you have the possibility to load nearly 1 million articles within one Mirador instance, and that you can browse and filter how you want, that you can do full text search and all the great Mirador features you know. But one part was presentation, the second part was interoperability. So let's look at the different collection. I told you already before, most of our stuff is at Swiss national platforms, which offer IIIF APIs. We use here the IIIF image API. So the thing is, we have a lot of different collections. We have specific metadata. Sometimes we want to provide specific search functionalities. For example, here it's the collection of an art historian from the 19th century who structured his collection hierarchically. And if you want to look at architecture from Italy, you get all the items here, and you can have a look again in Mirador to browse through all the 70 items just in one Mirador instance. And if you want to have a look, you can see, oops, sorry, there's the zoom control. You can see the IIIF image resources, they come from eManuscripta. So what we are doing here is reusing IIIF image resources to build our own dynamic manifests. I think especially this hierarchical approach might be interesting also for archival, archival content. But what we saw here is how we reuse interoperability. How do we provide interoperability? And I think that's the most important part of the whole presentation, is that we provide a link to a manifest which you can save or show, and which you can reuse in other contexts like Exhibit SO or a virtual research environment that supports IIIF. So with this dynamic approach to IIIF manifests, you have more or less what you see is what you get API. I think that's the great stuff about IIIF. It's mainly about presentation, but here you really don't have to think anymore about JSON, XML, or that it's an API. It's just a link, and you can use the filter and the search functionalities to build your subsets, which you can reuse. So now let's go back to my presentation. So what is now a dynamic IIIF manifest? Where do we scratch maybe the borders? We put multiple intellectual works in one manifest to present and search within. It's the canvas level that holds the main descriptive metadata for an intellectual work, therefore. There are also some limits. This approach at the moment won't work for objects with many images like books. It's like around 10 images. It's more or less the border at the moment. Maybe the separation between the objects is not that clear for the user within Mirador, but that are also implementation questions. But you saw the benefits, different views, metadata, full text. I didn't have the time to show you the AV integration. You could also put videos next to the images. It works perfectly fine within Mirador. That's really, really great. And the main focus is to put the presentation of the collection is driven by the user interests and not anymore by a predefined structure. And I think that's also really important when it's about reusing content. So the outlook. At the moment, we have nearly a dozen use cases for that kind of infrastructure. Not all with IIIF, but most of them. What we need to do is we need to stabilize the infrastructure and do more documentation. So it might also be reusable for you. We are also trying to separate the design layer and the functionality layer. So if you're interested, feel free to contact us. Would be really interested also to hear your ideas. And within the portal, there are so many more ideas what we could do. There's annotations. There are Mirador workspaces which we could reuse for building object baskets, arc resolving to provide more stable links, IIIF authentication, even it's a little bit a browser problem at the moment. And the next thing would be we provide more or less an infrastructure here, which can be reused. But to have a little bit a better overview about the workbench of IIIF applications, to also show researchers what they can do, because we had that question in a few presentations, what is IIIF apart from the viewer? But I think Exhibit SO is a really great example to show that. And maybe the idea would be if dynamic IIIF manifests is something that's used from more institutions, maybe we can also move from IIIF viewer to IIIF components to build a portal around, so it gets easier for all to have a more seamless integration. So thanks a lot for your attention. I would be really happy to have some feedback, what you think. If we have missed some things in the specs, that's definitely possible. I told you already, it's more like if it works, it works. If you want to have access to the newspaper collection to try it out, you have to contact me. I'll try to provide you access. You know, there are copyright issues. But I put the link for 2 more projects. They don't have full text where you can try out this dynamic IIIF concept. I hope they won't break. They are also still quite somewhere in between alpha and beta. Yes, and I think this would be the end of my presentation, and now there would be the room for questions. Thanks a lot for your attention.
That was really great, thank you. And the way you interleave the Mirador and the UV in that is just really, really nicely done. We do have one question. Once you get all of these things dynamically placed together, do you save the state as a new object with its own unique resource identifier, URI?
I think that was not maybe, might it be what's down here, so that you can save the manifest? That's more or less at the moment it's only saved within a cache, but the next step would be to move it to a Mongo database. And at the moment, you're performing a search, and we are translating the search to an ID query search. So in the background, we store the IDs you found. Does that answer the question?
Yes, Brian said in the chat that yes, it has. Thank you. Are there any other questions? We've got a couple of minutes. And I think the feedback from the chat is that you're not breaking the specs, so you're fine.
Okay. But I thought maybe where it might be, yeah, when we think about but I don't really know a lot about it, about the discovery API. I think you need stable manifests, but yeah, we can always still provide stable manifests for one article. So that's stuff where I thought there might be problems between the different implementations, different APIs.
Another question's just come in. What prevents you from using individual pages from a book?
Because actually, it doesn't prevent us to use individual pages from a book, but a book can have up to 1,000 pages. And so if you want to combine, here you have like, 200 articles, or 200 articles are combined. You can't really combine 200 books. That would be 200 times 100, 1,000 pages. So that doesn't really work. That's the problem. I think in here it would need maybe some specifications how you can combine collections and manifests as a single objects, and maybe just to integrate the preview image for a book. And if you click on it, you come to the it opens the whole book. I think that's somewhere where collections and dynamic IIIF manifests. At least I haven't found a good solution for that until now, which is implemented by the viewers. That's always the most important part for us, if it works.
That's great, thank you. Well, perfectly at time, so thanks. That was a great presentation, and thank you all. I'll see you in the next session.
Thanks.